She had told herself 1,000 times that working for Garrick Veld was just a job. That was the deal she'd made the morning. She walked into the Veld Group's Midtown Tower and signed a contract that paid triple what any legitimate firm would offer a 26-year-old with a state school diploma and a talent for making ugly numbers look clean. She'd grown up in a Cincinnati apartment where the heat got cut off every January, and her mother kept a second set of books for the cash-only dry cleaning business that wasn't entirely cash-only. Anya Reiss knew dirty money from clean money before she knew long division. Garrick Veld needed someone who understood both. She needed rent. 2 years later, she still told herself it was just a job. She told herself this every morning on the elevator ride up to the 31st floor, watching her own reflection flatten and sharpen in the polished steel doors. She told herself this when she sat across the conference table from men who'd broken other men's hands and reviewed their expense reports without blinking. She told herself this every time Veld walked into a room and the temperature seemed to drop, and every person inside it adjusted their posture slightly, straightened, tightened, except for her. She never adjusted. That was the other thing she'd told herself when she started. Never let him see you flinch. He noticed. She was certain of that. But neither of them said anything about it, and so it became just another line item in the silent accounting between them, something both sides acknowledged and neither side recorded. The Tuesday it all came apart started the same as every other Tuesday. Anya arrived at 7:45 and found 2 contract disputes waiting in her inbox, a discrepancy buried in the Harbour Line freight ledger that someone had tried to hide inside a fuel surcharge column, and a handwritten note from Veld clipped to the top file. My office, 8:30, bring the Kasner numbers. Veld's office was the corner room, floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that probably weighed more than her car, almost no personal items except a single framed photograph that always faced away from visitors. She'd never asked about it. Some questions you didn't ask in this building. The Kasner margins are worse than he told you, she said, before she'd fully cleared the doorway. She set the folder on his desk and stepped back to the precise professional distance she always kept. Close enough to work, far enough to be irreproachable, 11% under projection. He's been smoothing it with the West Side receivables. Veld didn't look up from the document he was reading. How long? 6 months, probably, maybe 8. Pull everything. He looked up then. His eyes were a flat, pale grey, the colour of lake water in November, and they held the same temperature. Full exposure report by end of day. You'll have it by 3. She turned to go. She had 4 hours of work to compress into 2, a call with the port attorney at noon, and this was the part she hadn't mentioned, a personal appointment at 7. She'd considered telling him. She'd decided not to. He paid her for results, not itineraries. She'd deliver the report by 3 and leave at 6 and be none of his business after that. She was almost to the door when he said, "Race." She stopped. She'd trained herself over 2 years not to turn immediately when he called her name. She gave it a single breath, then she turned. You're scheduled for the Alderson walkthrough at 6, Veld said. He was looking at the Kasner file, not at her. It'll run late. I'll reschedule it. Pending items are documented. Whitmore can cover. He looked up. The pause lasted 3 seconds. She'd counted enough of Veld's pauses to know their weight. 3 seconds meant something was being assessed. Personal plans, he said. Personal appointment, she corrected. My contracted hours end at 6, Mr. Veld. Tonight I'm using them. He studied her the way he studied balance sheets, searching for the irregularity, the line that didn't reconcile. Anya held his gaze and gave him nothing to find. Fine, he said, and looked back down. She walked out without thanking him for it. His name was Aaron Cheng, and he was the most ordinary man Anya had ever had dinner with, and she meant that as the highest possible compliment. He was a structural engineer at a mid-sized infrastructure firm. He coached a recreational soccer league on Saturday mornings. He had strong opinions about public transit funding and deeply average taste in music. When Anya had told him vaguely, that she worked in private financial operations, he'd asked what she liked about it. Not what it paid, not who the clients were, what she liked. She'd been so caught off guard that she'd answered honestly. The logic of it, the way numbers, unlike people, always resolved to something true. They'd met at a mutual friend's going-away party 3 weeks ago. He'd asked for her number in such a straightforward, untactical way that she'd given it to him before she remembered she didn't do that. They'd texted back and forth for 2 weeks. Nothing intense, just easy, and tonight was dinner. She'd chosen a place in Chelsea, small, good lighting, not the kind of restaurant that required a reservation 3 weeks out. She'd changed in the office bathroom, which she'd never done before, and she'd worn a rust-colored dress she'd bought a year ago and never had occasion for, and she'd let her hair down, which she almost never did in any context that involved work or the people adjacent to work. Walking the 3 blocks from the office, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness, the very specific sensation of being off the clock and actually believing it. Aaron was already at the table when she arrived, which she noted approvingly. He stood when he saw her, and his smile was open and slightly flustered in a way she found unexpectedly disarming. "You look really great," he said, and it came out a little rushed, which made her smile for real. The food was good. The wine was better. Aaron talked about a bridge project upstate that had hit an unexpected soil problem, and she found herself genuinely interested, asking follow-up questions about load distributions, pressure mapping, and he lit up because she understood the math. At some point he reached across the table and put his hand briefly over hers. Not a claim, just warmth. She let it stay. She didn't look toward the windows. She didn't feel watched. She wouldn't know about any of it until 4 days later. The discrepancy was on page 17 of the Halcott Group's billing statement. Anya almost missed it. She was processing the weekly retainer invoices on a Thursday afternoon, cross-referencing legal fees against the relevant shell accounts, the kind of meticulous, repetitive work that made most people's eyes glaze over, but that settled her mind like white noise. Then her hand stopped on the mouse. Cheng Engineering Consultants, contract suspension, dispute facilitation, creditor introduction, billed to Veld Group's Ridgeline LLC. Date, last Wednesday, the day after her dinner. She sat very still. She told herself it was coincidence. Cheng was a common name. Engineering consultants were common. She pulled the sub-files anyway, because she was the kind of person who always pulled the sub-files, who had learned early that the truth was always 1 layer deeper than where people expected you to stop looking. It took 11 minutes. Cheng Engineering's primary infrastructure contract, a significant city drainage project representing roughly 60% of the firm's annual revenue, had been flagged for a review hold following an anonymous complaint about permitting irregularities. The complaint had been filed from a legal entity connected, through 2 intermediary LLCs, to Ridgeline, which was Veld. The financing on Aaron's firm's office lease had been quietly transferred on Thursday to a holding company 4 layers deep in the Veld Group's property portfolio. The same Thursday Aaron had sent her a text that said, "Hey, sorry for the silence. Things got complicated at work. Can we rain check Saturday?" He hadn't texted again since. Anya sat back in her chair. The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere in the bullpen, a phone rang twice and went quiet. Outside, 31 floors down, the city moved through its afternoon without any awareness that a woman in a glass tower had just watched a very small, very terrible picture come into focus. She thought about Veld's voice on Tuesday, personal plans, the 3-second pause, the way his eyes had moved across her face when she told him she was leaving on time. She thought about Aaron texting things got complicated. She printed page 17. She uncapped her yellow highlighter, the same one she used to flag line items she needed Veld to actually read, and drew a clean line under Aaron's name. Then she picked up the paper, walked across the bullpen, and opened the mahogany door without knocking. He was on a call. He looked up sharply when she walked in. She never came in without knocking, and he knew it, and she watched him register that fact, and she crossed the room and placed the page in the center of his desk. He glanced down. She had learned to read his face in the half-second before he chose one. She saw the recognition. She saw the precise moment he decided on stillness. He set the phone down without finishing the call. Cheng Engineering. She kept her voice level. She'd worked on that on the walkover. That billing entry. Ridgelin acquires distressed receivables. It's standard. It wasn't distressed on Monday. She didn't raise her voice. The worst things she'd ever witnessed in 2 years happened in very quiet rooms. The anonymous complaint that triggered the contract hold was filed Wednesday morning, 14 hours after my dinner reservation. Veld said nothing. He was a structural engineer, Anya said. He coaches youth soccer. He had dinner with me. That is the complete inventory of everything he did. She paused. You pulled his city contract. You bought his building, because he sat across a table from me and touched my hand. He was a complication. He was a civilian. The word came out harder than she'd planned, and she let it. You dismantled a man's income because you didn't like where he was sitting. You didn't even know his name before you ran the file. I knew enough. You knew nothing. She put her hands flat on his desk and leaned forward, and she did not do this. She did not enter his space. She did not close the professional distance she'd maintained for 2 years. But she did it now. You are the most calculating person I have ever worked for, and I have worked for people who would frighten you. And you threw all of that calculation out a window because you saw me laugh at someone else's joke. Veld stood. He came around the desk. He stopped 2 feet from her, the closest he'd ever stood in 2 years, and she did not move back. Say it, she said quietly. His jaw tightened. You dragged a man's business into the ground, and you're standing here saying complication. Say what it actually was. Something shifted in his expression. Not collapse. Garrick Veld did not collapse. But a seam opened up, just briefly, in the controlled facade of him, and underneath it she saw something raw and unmanaged and almost unbearably human. Because you were looking at him, he said, very low, the way you have never looked at anything in this office. The air went thin. You don't get to do that. Her voice dropped too, but it didn't soften. You don't own me. You never did. I am your operations manager. I am not your property, and I am not a piece to move on your board, and you absolutely do not get to ruin an innocent man and call it protecting your interests. She straightened. She picked the paper back up. I'm resigning, effective immediately. He said her name, her first name, which he had never used, Anya. She stopped at the door. She didn't turn. You leave my protection, he said. There are people who know what you've seen in those books. I have always known more than you were comfortable with, she said. That was always the job. She opened the door. Goodbye, Mr. Veld. She walked out, and she kept walking, through the bullpen and past the elevator bank, and down 3 flights of stairs, because she didn't trust herself to stand still long enough to wait for a cab down from 31. She walked out into the street, and the afternoon light hit her face, and she thought, that's done. She didn't feel as light as she expected. The new position was at a logistics consulting firm in Stamford, legitimate, clean. The coffee in the break room tasted like recirculated air, and the primary workplace drama was a passive-aggressive email chain about someone's unlabeled lunch in the communal refrigerator. 3 weeks in, Anya sat at a laminate desk reviewing a freight dispute for a hardware distributor and thought, this is safe. Safe was fluorescent lighting and a supervisor named Dennis who CC'd 4 people on every email. Safe was leaving at 5:15 and sleeping 8 hours and never receiving a call at 2 in the morning about a shipment that had gone sideways at the port. Safe was sitting across from people who would never, under any circumstances, break anyone's hand. She'd thought she wanted Safe. She was discovering she'd confused it with enough. Aaron had texted once, about 10 days after she'd left. He didn't know anything about Veld or any of it, and she wasn't going to tell him. He said work had gotten complicated and he was sorry for going quiet. She'd told him the timing hadn't been right on her end either, which was true in a way she couldn't explain. He'd been gracious about it. That sat in her chest like a splinter she couldn't reach. She thought about it on her commute. She thought about the Halcott breach filing she'd heard, through a professional contact, was sitting unaddressed at the Veld Group offices. She thought about the Kasner accounts and the way she'd flagged the exposure risk 2 months ago, and what would happen if no one who understood the books was actually looking at the books. She thought about a man who had let her walk out the door. That was the part she kept returning to. Garrick Veld controlled shipping contracts through 3 major ports. He had police captains and city councilmen on his ledger. He could have made it very difficult for her to leave, and he hadn't. He'd stood in his office and let her go, and she'd spent 3 weeks in Stamford trying to decide what that meant. On a Thursday night 3 weeks and 2 days after she'd resigned, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize. The woman on the other end identified herself as Delphine, Veld's head of legal operations. Anya had met her twice. She was the sharpest person in that office besides Anya herself. "Marcus Kasner has moved against the port contracts," Delphine said without preamble. "2 senior liaisons are in federal holding under charges we believe were manufactured. The Halcott Group filed a breach claim on Tuesday." A pause. "It's sitting on a desk unread. Mr. Veld has capable people." "Miss Reiss." Delphine's voice was precise and unsparing. "He hasn't reviewed a financial file in 3 weeks. Kasner moved at the exact moment the operation was most exposed. I think we both know why that moment was available." Anya stared at her takeout container going cold on the coffee table. "Is he hurt?" she asked. 3 seconds of silence. There was a confrontation at a Bronx warehouse Tuesday night. "He's functional." She closed her eyes. She thought about a man who ran an empire on calculation and cold logic, sitting in the dark watching everything develop cracks because one person had walked out. She thought about a man who, when given the choice between locking the door and letting her go, had let her go. She thought about who she was in that office and who she was in this one, and the very significant distance between those 2 things. She thought about the Halcott breach filing. "Give me the address," she said. Pax met her at the side entrance of a warehouse near the river, a wide-shouldered man who'd driven her home twice in 2 years after late-night emergencies, and who had never said more to her than 12 words at a stretch. He held the door without comment. "He told me not to contact you," Pax said. "I know," Anya said. "You didn't." She went upstairs. The 2nd floor was a functional, secure room. Nothing comfortable about it, just solid. Veld was at a steel work table with a laptop and a secure phone and the remnants of a meal someone had brought that he hadn't touched. He was wearing a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a fresh bandage visible on his left forearm. He was working. Of course he was working. She doubted he had any other setting. He looked up when she walked in. She saw it again, the half-second before the chosen face. This time he didn't cover it. He let it sit there visible, which she understood cost him something. He was not a man who showed the unmanaged thing underneath. "Delphine," he said, not a question. "Do you have the Port Authority sub-files from the last 6 weeks?" She set her bag down and pulled out her laptop. "Anya." "The files, Mr. Veld." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled up the shared drive and turned the screen. They worked for 2 hours. She dismantled the Halcott breach claim and showed him the 3 clauses Kasner's people had tried to exploit and the 2 places where the contract actually protected them instead. She mapped Kasner's play backward through the public filings, tracing the timing and coordination until the shape of it was clear. Someone gave him the schedule, she said, mostly to herself. He knew exactly when the gaps were. "Kasner's handled," Veld said flatly. She understood what that meant. She didn't ask more. Around midnight, she closed the last file and sat back. Outside, rain was coming down against the windows in long grey sheets. "You lost 3 weeks," she said. "Yes." "Kasner nearly had the ports." "Yes." She looked at him directly. and Aaron Cheng is still dealing with what you did to his firm." The name landed. She'd said it deliberately. Veld's jaw moved. "Yes. That gets fixed." She kept her voice even and clear. "I don't care how you do it. The contract hold on his city project gets lifted. His lease financing goes back to original terms. It happens without him ever knowing it was you." She paused. "That's not a negotiation." He held her gaze. Something moved through his expression that wasn't quite a challenge, and wasn't quite an argument. "It gets done," he said. She believed him. That was the thing about Garrick Veld. He didn't make promises, but the things he stated as facts became facts. She looked at him across the scattered files, and the cold coffee, and 2 years of careful professional distance they'd maintained like a shared lie they'd both agreed to keep telling. She thought about what it meant that she was sitting here, that she'd come, that she'd gotten in a car and come to a warehouse in the Bronx at midnight, because a man she didn't work for anymore had been sitting in the dark, letting everything fall apart. "I'm not your employee," she said. He went still. "If I come back, it's as a partner, operational authority, equal sign-off on any action that runs through my books." She folded her hands on the table. "And I have the right to have dinner with whoever I want. You don't run files on them. You don't acquire their buildings. You don't touch their contracts. You're negotiating." "I'm always negotiating. You've just never been on this side of the table." She met his eyes. "Do you agree to the terms?" He didn't look away. The flat grey of his eyes had something behind it she'd only glimpsed once before, through the gap in the controlled facade. "I let you go," he said. "I noticed. I could have made it very difficult. I know that. I didn't." "I know that too," she said quietly. "That's why I'm here." He reached across the work table, slow and deliberate, and rested his fingers against the back of her hand. Not a claim, not the proprietary, presumptuous reach she'd expected from a man like him. Just a question, asked without words. She turned her hand over. She let her fingers close around his. He exhaled, a controlled, careful sound, like something under pressure finally finding a release valve, and the last of the distance between them settled into something new, not gone, transformed. "Draft the partnership terms," he said after a moment. "I'll have them on your desk Monday." "Of course you will." The rain pressed against the windows and the city hummed below them, and somewhere out there, by Monday morning, a contract hold would quietly disappear from an infrastructure firm's file, and a lease would revert to its original terms, and Aaron Cheng would never know why his luck had turned. That wasn't justice, but it was the closest thing available, and Anya Reiss had spent enough years in the margins of this world to know the difference between justice and what was actually possible. She kept her hand in his. He didn't loosen his grip. The quarterly accounts were still unreconciled. The Halcott file had 2 more clauses to work through. There would be a new problem by morning. There was always a new problem by morning, in every life she'd ever known. But for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't pretending she was only there for the numbers. When a woman who's spent her whole life calculating exits finally decides to stay, it isn't surrender. It's the most deliberate choice she's ever made. Anya Reiss had always known the difference between a cage and a fortress. She knew who held the key to this one. She did. She always had. She'd just finally stopped, pretending she wasn't going to use it.